Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. And today we're talking about the role of flagellants in the armies of the Empire of Man. So, flagellants, I think, are something that look quite promising on paper, and they're definitely a unit I was intending to use in my original drafts of my Empire army list. I think they're quite cool thematically. They are a little bit quirky, a little bit interesting, so they add a different dimension to the models that you've got on the table and the rules that you've got access to on the table when using the Empire of Man. But ultimately, this unit did end up on the cutting room floor, and I really want to explain, or rather explore, the reasons behind this. But first of all, what are flagellants? Flagellants are extremely devout, some would say crazed, worshippers of the god Sigmar. And they believe in the imminent destruction of the world, fundamentally. Now, it turns out, if you played Warhammer Fantasy Battles in 8th edition during the time of Karl Franz, he was the emperor during the time that game was set, actually it turns out the flagellants were correct, because we did end up going into the end times and the world was destroyed, providing that segue for Games Workshop to launch into the Age of Sigmar game. However, at the time Warhammer Old World is set, that is several hundred years away, so the end of the world is not entirely nigh. Now, I mentioned with the flagellants that on paper they look like a really useful choice. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of, well, rather three special rules that they've got which make them seem really useful, particularly in an Empire army, which fundamentally, in my experience, likes to run away and is made up of units where the models get removed quite quickly once you get into the press of close combat. So what are these rules? Well, firstly, you've got immune to psychology. Fear causes, terror causes, enemy dragons, things like that. This unit's not going to run away from them. It's going to hold the line, which is fundamentally, I think, what this unit is here for. It's also unbreakable, so if an enemy unit does get into contact with it, it's going to have to cut every single last one of them down before it frees up the space to maneuver freely. And that's not necessarily as easy as it seems, because the unit does have hatred, which combines really nicely with its flail. So the first turn of combat, the flail grants a +2 strength bonus. The hatred is giving them rerolls to hit. And it also should be noted that the flail provides an armor penetration value of -2. Now, although the strength bonus only applies in the first round of combat, that armor penetration maintains, so they can do a little bit of damage if they get to swing at their opponents. The other thing I think that is key to note, however, is that the only character that can join a unit of flagellants is a warrior priest or lector of Sigmar. And we'll talk about that character choices in just a moment. So overall, it looks like you've got a unit that's pretty good at really holding space, denying room to the opposition. You can throw it forward, they're not going to go anywhere. If you can get them in touch with a big gribbly, the big gribbly is going to have to take down all of them in order to then create the space to harass the rest of your army. And that all seems really, really good. But there are a few howevers. First one is they're only toughness 3 and initiative 3. This does mean in close combat there's a really good chance that an opposing unit will get to swing before them, and they are very vulnerable with that low toughness score of the models just being taken off in droves. Now, they do have a ward save. It's 6 up, 5 up against a strength of 5 up. So much the same way as the Bretonnian protection of the Lady of the Lake. But overall, I think this does leave them incredibly vulnerable to small arms fire. you're only going to get that 6-up save from the ward. They've got no other armour to talk about, so they can be whittled down quite easily to the point where one good charge will absolutely wreck the unit. So they're not going to hold that ground very long because they're just going to fall over too quickly. The other downside is to mention here is impetuous. Now, this means you've got a 50-50 chance if there's a potential charge for them to be had that they will make that charge, or at least attempt to. So your opponent can easily set up a long bomb charge against some chaff, watch you fail that 50-50 roll to pull them out of position, expose a flank, or even at that point, just be able to walk around them because they've been pulled out of position. Personally, I think if Flagellants were going to have to be in a position where they have to make charges, perhaps give them the frenzy rule, something like that. So at least they get that +1 attack if they do successfully make the charge. On the times I've used them, impetuous has been quite problematic, and when charged rather than making the charge, I was very rarely getting many attacks back, so things like hatred and the +2 strength bonus from the flail weren't really helping because so many of the models had been taken out before they got a chance to swing. So coming in as a rare choice and at 13 points per model, so for a decent sized unit of these you're looking at a good 200 points or so. I think there's a lot of downsides which make them a less obvious pick once you actually see what they're doing on the table. I did say that I'd touch on characters, and that only warrior priests and lectors of Sigmar are able to join this unit. So let's just quickly touch on what these characters bring to the table to see if they're something that you'd want to add to the cost of this particular unit, albeit it's being paid out of your character allowance and not your rare choice allowance. What do they do? Well, fundamentally, the unit allows the warrior priest to become unbreakable, so that's something. They're equally as unbreakable as the Flagellants, and the warrior priest will grant a magic resistance of -1 to the unit, so it will make them a little less vulnerable to incoming magical attacks. Fundamentally, I think what you'd be looking for from a warrior priest, though, are the prayers to Sigmar, of which it can cast one of 3. The first one is Hammer of Sigmar. This gives a reroll to hit and reroll to wound where a natural 1 is rolled, but the unit's already got hatred, so that means realistically it's only going to affect the to wound rolls. Really, this means that you've probably got other units that if you've got a warrior priest of Sigmar of some flavour, another unit might be a better recipient of this particular prayer. Then you've got Shield of Faith. This gives a 5-up ward save versus shooting. This is probably pretty helpful against small arms fire. Mentioned already that the Flagellants are vulnerable to that. However, they've already got a 6-up ward save against this. Yes, this improves the chances of them surviving from 1 in 6 wounds to 1 in 3 wounds, so nothing to be particularly sniffed at. But again, something without a ward save would see potentially a much bigger benefit from being the recipient of this prayer. Finally, there's Soulfire. D6, strength 3 hits at AP -2, where these hits are both magical and flaming. So this could be quite helpful for a unit once it's in combat, dishing out an extra bit of damage for the enemy to worry about. But at 60 points for a warrior priest and 110 points for a lector, I would question whether that is worth it, or whether there are other characters which are going to just produce more bang for your buck overall. Personally, I'm a huge fan of engineers, and at 45 points, I think, off the top of my head, they offer great value in keeping artillery, firing, and hellblasters accurate. Probably would do more over the course of a game with just a couple of rolls than you'd expect from a warrior priest. I would say overall, when looking at the Flagellants, either with or without support, is quite frankly, I think the steam tank just does the same job but better. It's got a high toughness, it's got a good armor save, it's got a breath weapon, it's got a cannon on it. Yes, it may not necessarily dish out quite as much damage in a good turn for the Flagellants, but the steam tank's unbreakable. It's immune to psychology. It's going to grind people down and be a massive nuisance, and it takes a lot of dedication to get rid of. Unsupported, it can hold a flank for a few turns against most things. Supported by other units, it can get some really good results. So I think overall, really, if you're looking for a unit that's just going to hold up one flank to allow you to focus on another part of the battlefield, the steam tank probably just does that job better, and then allows you to project force across the table with its cannon as well. So a lot more advantages there for a unit that's a little bit more expensive, probably, assuming you don't put any characters in the Flagellants, but probably a similar sort of cost actually if you are then going the full works and putting a character in to buff that unit. In terms of other rare choices, Flagellants will also suffer here, I think, because they're also competing against the Hellblaster volley gun. This, when backed by an engineer, certainly has the potential to do a lot of damage to enemy units and to really give them pause for thought. Yes, it's only got 24-inch range, so it's probably not getting any shots off turn 1, but it can wreck a unit's day with a good dice roll. And if you want a Hellblaster and you want a steam tank, chances are you're not going to have room in your force for a unit of Flagellants as well. They're just not going to make the cut compared to those options, but in part, I suppose it depends what kind of army you're taking and how you want to play the game. I would say I do think the Flagellants are a wonderful thematic unit, and if you're not looking at a strictly competitive play, they're a great unit to have in. They're going to do something a little bit different. You could even have a couple of units of them if you're going down that more religious bent or simply less artillery-driven Empire army. So definitely, I think there is a place for them, but I think from a competitive mindset, or when you're trying to just put together a strong Empire list, they're probably coming out second best. Final thing for me to say is thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this video, do please check out the other videos I've done regarding units in the Empire roster. There's quite a few of those available for viewing now. And if you do like those, do consider subscribing as well. It is the best way, along with giving a few moments of your time to support a small channel such as this one. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.